Dawn, June 4, 1942, somewhere in the Central Pacific. On the flight deck of the carrier Akagi, flagship of the very force that had struck Pearl Harbor, spirits are high. The first wave against Midway Atoll has just returned. Victory looks assured. It isn't. This ship, arguably the deadliest weapons platform afloat, is already finished. Its doom wasn't sealed by the American dive bombers, still hours away. It was sealed weeks earlier, by a single radio transmission, one the Japanese themselves intercepted, translated, and unwittingly used to confirm their own downfall. The sailors standing on that deck are, in every meaningful sense, already ghosts. Midway is usually remembered as a miracle. A handful of American pilots stumbling, against impossible odds, onto a vulnerable Japanese fleet and reversing the entire war in 5 furious minutes. It's a great story. It's also not what happened. That's the ending, not the plot. The real story unfolded earlier, in secrecy, in a windowless basement, half a world from the fighting, a quiet, high-stakes contest of wits. Midway wasn't luck. It was an ambush, engineered in advance. The Americans weren't stumbling around hoping to find the enemy. They already knew exactly where the Japanese were headed, and they were sitting there waiting. The instrument that made that ambush possible wasn't a bomb or a torpedo. It was a single fabricated sentence, broadcast in the open, specifically so Japanese listening posts would catch it. A routine-sounding complaint about a broken water still on Midway Atoll. That small, invented detail was the hook, and Tokyo swallowed it whole, handing the U.S. Navy the single most valuable piece of intelligence of the entire Pacific War, and springing a trap on itself in the process. The Akagi's destruction didn't start when the first bomb hit her deck. It started the moment a Japanese cryptographer decoded that message about fresh water and passed it up the chain. So the real question isn't whether America got lucky at Midway. It's how a 2-letter codename, one analyst's stubborn hunch, and a lie about plumbing, managed to unravel the most powerful navy on the planet. How a war fought with intercepts and deception turned, in the end, into a literal firestorm on the deck of Japan's proudest carrier. To understand that, we have to rewind to the darkest stretch of the war for the U.S. Navy, when a scrappy, underfunded intelligence outfit was fighting simply to be believed. Spring 1942 was haunted territory for the U.S. Navy, haunted by the battleships still rusting in the mud at Pearl Harbor, by the sailors lost off Java, by the surrendered garrisons of Wake, Guam, and the Philippines. Japan wasn't merely winning. It was redrawing the map of the Pacific at breakneck speed, led by veteran commanders like Nagumo and Yamamoto. American newsreels talked up plucky factory workers, but behind closed doors the mood in Washington was bleak. The war, quite simply, was being lost. America's one real edge sat 15 feet underground, in a stuffy, windowless basement of the 14th Naval District building at Pearl Harbor. No ships, no guns, just tabulating machines clattering away, and roughly 120 exhausted men working around the clock. This was Station HYPO, the Navy's combat intelligence unit, and it was the country's best remaining hope. Its commander, Joseph Rochefort, was nothing like the buttoned-up Navy stereotype. He ran his 12-hour shifts in a smoking jacket and slippers, spoke fluent Japanese, and had an almost supernatural feel for patterns, not just in codes but in people. Navies, he believed, run on habit, and habits leak secrets. His team was an odd mix of cryptanalysts, translators, and musicians, pulled from the sunken USS California's ship band. Their trained ears turned out to be excellent at picking rhythm out of noise. They nicknamed their workspace the dungeon, and it fit, sealed off from daylight, connected to the outside world only through an unbroken stream of Japanese naval radio traffic. Their target, the JN-25 naval code, combined a huge codebook of 5-digit number groups with a second layer of random additive numbers, theoretically unbreakable by pure math. HYPO didn't try to outmath it. They picked the lock instead, hunting for the small human slip-ups, a reused key, a lazy shortcut, that let them map who was talking to whom, even when they couldn't yet read every word. They called it traffic analysis, and it put them at odds with Washington's code-breaking office, OP-20G, which trusted only slow, rigorous, purely mathematical decryption and viewed Rochefort's instinct-driven methods as reckless guesswork. That rivalry nearly boiled over at Coral Sea in early May, when Rochefort correctly flagged a Japanese move on Port Moresby. But with only 15% of the traffic decoded, the picture was incomplete. The Lexington was lost, and his critics in Washington had fresh ammunition. His next big call had to be flawless, and everyone in the dungeon knew it was coming soon. Before the smoke from Coral Sea had cleared, Japanese radio traffic surged to levels not seen since the run-up to Pearl Harbor, the unmistakable sound of something enormous being assembled. Amid the flood of intercepts, one small recurring element caught HYPO's attention, a two-letter designator, showing up again and again in messages about reconnaissance flights, water barges, and airfield logistics. It was obviously a place. Its actual meaning was locked inside the 85% of JN-25 they still couldn't read. Just a whisper in the static, but to men trained to hunt for patterns in noise, it was a thread worth pulling. That thread was the designator AF. It kept surfacing as the target of a massive coming operation, the objective of reconnaissance sorties, the destination for logistics planning, the focus of an entire fleet's attention. Cracking what AF meant stopped being an academic exercise and became existential. Rochefort's team traced the reconnaissance flights back to bases in the Marshall Islands. A ruler on a map showed that planes launched from there could just reach Midway, but nothing closer to Hawaii or the mainland. An earlier partial intercept had also referenced a related code, AFK, which the team had tentatively pegged as Midway. The pieces fit. Rochefort was certain. AF was Midway. Washington disagreed, convinced AF pointed instead to the Aleutians. Or worse, somewhere on the U.S. mainland, since Japan genuinely was staging a secondary strike toward Alaska, and OP-20G, working without HYPO's Pacific side context, mistook the diversion for the main event. Caustic messages arrived by teletype, questioning Rochefort's methods. Nimitz was stuck between two intelligence services telling him opposite things, with only 3 carriers left to bet on the answer. Analysis alone wouldn't settle it. Rochefort needed proof, and if the Japanese wouldn't hand it to him honestly, he'd trick them into doing so. His plan leaned on one mundane fact. Midway, a barren coral island, depended entirely on desalination for fresh water. On May 10th, he pitched Leighton on a scheme to use the secure undersea cable to Midway, untappable by Japan, to order the garrison commander to broadcast, in the clear, a fabricated report of a major breakdown in the island's water distillation plant. It was believable, urgent, and exactly the sort of routine complaint a Japanese listening post would snap up without suspicion. Nimitz approved the gamble. On May 19th, the order went out, and soon after, Midway's radio operator tapped out the bait. Main evaporator down, only 2 weeks of water left. Then came the wait. 2 days later, on May 22nd, an analyst flagged a Japanese intercept, reporting that location AF was suffering a critical water shortage. The trap had closed on itself. AF had a name, Midway, and Nimitz threw his weight fully behind Rochefort, sending Enterprise, Hornet, and a hastily patched-up Yorktown, rebuilt in just 48 hours by 1,400 shipyard workers, to a rendezvous point codenamed Point Luck to wait in ambush. On June 4th, Midway's scout planes spotted the Japanese carriers. An American squadron scrambled off Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown. The first strikes were catastrophic. Outdated, unescorted torpedo bombers were cut to ribbons by Japan's superb Zero fighters. Of 41 torpedo planes launched, 37 were destroyed, more than 70 airmen killed, and not one hit landed. Watching from Akagi's bridge, Admiral Nagumo saw only confirmation of his own superiority. But the sacrifice had bought something invisible. It had dragged every Japanese fighter down to wave-top height and thrown Nagumo's flight deck schedule into disarray, right as a scout plane reported an American carrier nearby, forcing him to order his aircraft rearmed from land bombs to torpedoes. Hangar decks turned into chaos, bombs stacked loose, fuel lines uncoiled everywhere, planes packed wingtip to wingtip, fully fueled. For a few catastrophic minutes, Japan's finest carriers were floating powder kegs. Meanwhile, high above and off course, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey's dive bombers from Enterprise were running low on fuel and had found nothing, until McCluskey spotted a lone Japanese destroyer racing to rejoin its fleet and gambled that following it would lead him to the enemy. It did. At 10:22 a.m., breaking through cloud cover, he found 4 Japanese carriers directly below, decks crowded with armed, fueled aircraft, their fighter cover still down at sea level from the earlier torpedo attacks. It was the one moment all day when victory was possible, and McCluskey took it, leading his squadron into a screaming dive straight onto the Akagi. The bomb that struck home wasn't really the cause of the Akagi's destruction. It was only the trigger. The real charge had been packed weeks earlier, in Rochefort's basement, and armed again in the chaos of Nagumo's rearming order. The narrow window that made that single bomb so devastating existed only because torpedo squadrons 8, 6, and 3 had died forcing it open, and because one commander followed a hunch about a stray destroyer, and because Nimitz had staked his entire remaining fleet on the word of a man who worked in slippers and led a team of cryptanalysts and musicians. Midway wasn't a fluke. It was won in a basement weeks before the shooting started, by analysts who read patterns in static, officers who carried the truth up the chain, and an admiral willing to trust them. The inferno on Akagi's deck was just the last echo of one whispered lie about water that Japan never should have believed.